Of the day. I will be honored to chair the session. My name is Teemu Pennanen, and I was happy to see that both talks are on optimization. I'm a big fan of the subject. The first talk will be given by Stefan Crepet. He will be talking about XVA and GPU optimization. Please.
Thank you very much. This is joint work with Lokman Abbas Turki and our common PhD student, Babacar Diallo. So, XVAs, for people who do not know, are pricing add-ons, which are meant to account for counterparty risk and its capital and funding implications. So they are dubbed XVAs. So X is a generic letter, and VA stands for valuation adjustment. So X can mean C for credit, D for debt, F for funding, M for margin, K for capital, etc. There are add-ons on entry prices on individual trades, okay, called in this context FTP, Funds Transfer Price, which is an add-on on a particular trade accounting for these extra risks that we want to account for. But they have also an accounting relevance. They are also accounting entries. So at the global portfolio level, XVAs enter the balance sheet of the bank. And for instance, during the big financial crisis, the Basel Committee reported that 2/3 of the losses attributed to counterparty credit risk were not due to actual defaults, but simply to CVA losses that are part of the balance sheet and therefore the result of the bank. And similarly, in January 2014, JP Morgan has recorded a 1.5 billion FVA loss, right? So it's important to understand that these numbers are correction to prices of trades, but they're also part of the result of the bank. And that's why they are so important. Okay. And as a matter of fact, the individual FTP of a trade is actually computed as a portfolio increment. Okay, so these numbers exist primarily at the portfolio level. So XVAs represent a switch of paradigm in derivative management from hedging, which would be the classical Black-Scholes paradigm, where everything can be done trade by trade because everything is replicatable, okay, to balance sheet optimization. This is a new point of view with XVAs. So this is a view of derivative management as portfolio optimization, but not for a hedge fund or, in that case, for a bank, which is a market maker, which is a bit unusual because a bank is not supposed to choose the quantities of assets that the bank is trading. Clients are coming, and bank has the only freedom of proposing a price. So in relation to your talk actually yesterday, okay, it's an interesting extension of the usual portfolio optimization paradigm, which is less focused on the weights invested in the risky assets, let's say, and more on the prices, on the returns of the assets themselves. So as a result, XVA deeply affects the derivative pricing task by making it global, that is portfolio-wide, non-linear, as we will see, and also entity-dependent. So I don't have really time to develop what I just said, and that would be in that section, that I will essentially skip. That is understanding the principles that are behind these quantities and which quantities actually deserve to be part of the prices, which do not. Some issues about double counting between some of these. So I'm leaving this to you as readers. And I will go directly to the XVA equations that can be derived from these first principles. Okay. So I will give you directly the equations, okay, because the focus on that talk is more numerical, actually. So for concreteness, we consider a bank engaged into bilateral trading with a single client as a starting point. And of course, a bank has maybe 2,000 clients, so we need to leverage after that. But I am starting by one single client with promised cash flows D. So D is a cumulative process of all the cash flows that the bank has with this client. And a final maturity of the portfolio, which is denoted by capital T. Okay. The default time of the client is tau c. The recovery rate of the client is RC. Okay? And counterparty risk is not really hedged, but because it is hard to hedge, so it is mitigated. That is, it is handled through collateral posts, and also in the case of CCP, of centrally cleared trading of default fund guarantee, but first collateral. Okay? And there are several layers of collateral defense, okay, which are set against counterparty risk. So the first one is the variation margin, which is an amount of collateral which is tracking the value of the client portfolio of the bank on a time grid, which can be daily or even intradaily. Okay? And in my convention, I count this amount VM as positive when it is received by the bank. So at a time where the client owes some money in mark-to-market value to the bank, the client is supposed to post some collateral, some variation margin, which reflects that value, so that if the client would default at that point in time, the money that is due would be here, and the bank could seize that money. That would become the property of the bank at that moment. Okay? The thing is, liquidation takes time. Okay? So between the time where the client defaults and the time where the bank gets the collateral, some time passes, and during that time, gap risk develops, which means there can be slippage between the value of the portfolio and the value of the margin, which is frozen from default on. And therefore, there is a second line of defense, which is initial margin, okay, which is posted on top of variation margin, and which is a guarantee on top of variation margin against this risk of gap. And it comes in two components: posted initial margin, which is posted by the bank to its client, and received initial margin, which is posted by the client to the bank. In that case, we need to distinguish the two directions of the margin, because as opposed to variation margin, which is rehypothecable, that is, you can use it for your funding if you receive it. In the case of initial margin, this margin is segregated. It is locked in a safe, if you want, in a third-party account. And so we need to distinguish between the one which is posted and the one which is received. And in order to raise margins, you need basically to borrow. Okay? And since the nature of these margins are different, you don't have access to the same borrowing rates when you kind of borrow to raise VM or when you borrow to raise IM. So basically, when you raise variation margin, it costs you your own funding spread, reflected by your CDS curve, which I denote by lambda. Whereas in the case of EM, there are ways to mitigate and to come out with a blended funding spread, which I denote by lambda bar. So not necessarily the same. So base case would be lambda bar equal to lambda equal to CDS spread of the bank, but there can be some mitigation around that. And so for simplicity, notational simplicity, I assume that the liquidation of the bank is instantaneous, okay, which doesn't completely mean that EM is useless, because there can also be a situation where at the time where the client defaults by bad luck, this is the precise time where the client owes you a big cash flow, like a CDS cash flow, for instance. This happens. And then you see that initial margin is useful as a defense against that potential extra loss on top of the loss on the mark-to-market and the value of the portfolio itself, which is already taken account for by variation margin. So this takes me to my first set of equations, of XVA equations. And here I'm referring to credit variation adjustment, which is meant to account for what I am losing due to the default of my client. Okay? So this is all understood in a risk-neutral fashion, okay? Even though these risks can hardly be hedged. But the thing is that this will not be the end of the story. The next slides will be about cost of capital. That is the fact that you cannot hedge, and therefore this is handled on a reserve and capital basis. So the bank has to set aside capital and therefore has to remunerate its shareholders for their capital at risk. But anyway, at that step, This is risk-neutral pricing. There is a discount factor, risk-neutral discount factor, which is denoted by beta. And then what this equation number 1 is saying is that at the time my client defaults, so at time tau c, provided this occurs between now, which is time t, and final maturity, which is big T, like 30 years, final maturity of the portfolio. Okay? So where my client defaults, MTM is the mark-to-market value of the portfolio between the two of us, which is a counterparty risk-free valuation of what the client owes me. Okay? Maybe at the time where the client defaults, this is precisely the time where the client should have paid me a big dividend, like a CDS protection payment, so, which is the jump process of that cumulative contractual dividend process D that I introduced before. Okay? So that's really the debt of the client to me. Can be positive, can be negative. Okay? And that debt is reduced by the guarantees that the client has posted to me, which is first variation margin, which is the first layer of guarantee, and coming on top of that, all the initial margin that I received from my client, so that the client posted to me, which I denote by RIM. Okay? And then it's only if the debt of the client to me net of the guarantee is in the positive, that the default of the client really impacts me. Because if the net debt is negative, it means I am owing something to him. And then by standard market rules, I would just settle my debt, and that's it. No gain, no loss. Okay, so the bad scenario is where when the client defaults, the client owes me some money on top of the margin that the client has posted. And then I'm losing the positive part of the difference. Okay, modulo, of course, recovery. Okay, so if there is a recovery rate of 20%, if the client was owing me 100, I'm only losing 80. Okay, so this is the meaning of this cash flow. Okay, and since we are in a risk-neutral framework, valuation of that cash flow is expectation discounted as a risk-neutral rate of the cash flow itself, which is what this formula is saying. Okay, so this formula should be relatively clear. Okay. Then an extra cost is related to the, well, so then you might wonder why you don't see on that slide the symmetrical quantity, which is what my clients are losing because of my potential default, which is called DVA. Okay? And the reason why I'm not putting it here is because I am in a shareholder optimization perspective where it's only the cash flows that are perceived or paid by the bank before its own default that matter. Because post-bank default cash flows only impact the creditors of the bank, whereas the stakeholders who have the power to agree or not on a deal at a certain price are the shareholders of the bank. So I'm only putting here the valuation of the counterparty risk-related pre-bank default cash flows. That's why I'm disregarding DVA. Not to say it does not exist, just to say it only matters to creditors. So they should not be accounted for in entry prices. However, if I am risky, and the bank is now perceived as risky by markets, of course, in the crisis, and my credit spread is 100 BPs, when I go to the market to borrow cash collateral to send as variation margin or initial margin, it will cost me an extra 100 BPs on top of the risk-free rate. Okay? And that's an extra cost as compared with classical framework, where I am supposed to be able to lend or borrow any amount of cash that I need at risk-free rate. Okay? And that's an extra cost, and the integrated cost would be expectation of future integrated costs, which are this 100 BPs time at any time S in any scenario omega, the actual amount I need to borrow as variation margin, because this is the meaning of FVA. FVA is the cost of borrowing variation margin. Okay? So what is the amount of variation margin I need to borrow at a given point in time? So what it's important to realize that when I when I have trades with a client, okay, I also have a mark-to-market hedge a back-to-back hedge of the corresponding market risk with other banks, which means if the counterparty risk-free value of the trade is M to M, okay, to simplify, I need to, if the value of the trade is 100, I need to borrow 100 to buy the trade, which can be interpreted as the meaning of this amount here. But let us say the client posts 30 as VM to me. Then what I need to borrow really is only the difference 100 minus 30. Okay? And not only that, because I will also charge to my client CVA amount, FVA amount, MVA amount. This will all be charged to the client. I can also use that money for my funding. So the net VM funding debt is the mark-to-market of the deal, which is what I need to pay for the trade, minus everything I get from my client as a free funding source, okay, which is the aggregate of all these guys here. Okay. So in the end, it's only the positive part of this difference which costs me 100 BPs on top of risk-free. And that's why the FVA is given by this equation, which, as you can see, is implicit because FVS sits on the right-hand side. So that's a BSD, actually. And then regarding MVA, the cost of raising initial margin, things are a bit simpler conceptually, in a sense. Well, the complexity is hidden in lambda bar, but I will not go into that. Namely, if I have to post initial margin, the story is simple. I need to borrow that money. And then the question is, how can I cleverly, maybe not borrow myself, but ask somebody else to borrow instead of me, which can have an impact on this lambda bar. But essentially, I mean, I'm borrowing 100. It costs me 100 BPs per unit. So that would be the cost, the aggregate cost of it. And these are our three risk-neutral VAs. Okay? The aggregate is called contra assets, meaning which is actually a liability. And again, these guys enter the balance sheet of the bank as liabilities, because if I am an XVA trader, I charge a CVA premium to my client. The meaning is that in the future, I am exposed to the corresponding loss. Okay? So CVA is really a liability. Same for these two people. But these are special liabilities that come as a consequence of a deal. We call them contra assets. So that's all risk neutral. And it cannot really be hedged efficiently. I mean, banks can do partial hedge, but it cannot be a perfect hedge. In particular, the jump to default risk of these people cannot really be hedged. And that's why regulator comes and say, hey, you are doing this trading, you have this unhedged P&L, okay? So please put capital at risk. So, and therefore, the shareholders of the bank need to put at risk a certain amount, okay? But then, of course, they require remuneration for that. They would not accept to put capital at risk without expectation of some returns, okay? So the way we model this remuneration is to first model the amount at risk itself, so the economic capital of the bank, as a risk measure, a conditional risk measure actually, so we use expected shortfall at some confidence level A, of the coming year losses or profit of the bank. So L is the process, is a P&L, basically. It's a trading P&L, a trading loss and profit process. But in our context, trading loss and profit process means essentially the trading P&L of the XVA traders. Okay? So what cannot be covered in terms of CVA, FVA, etc. Right? So if you are at a given time T, due to the XVA trading, there is a fluctuating P&L in the future, and you can measure the risk by a risk measure of the 1 year future P&L, and that would model the amount of capital that the shareholders have to put at risk at any given time in any scenario. Okay? And then if you do the mathematics, okay, if you're asking yourselves how much the bank should charge to the client as an additional add-on price component to put into some special account so that the bank is in a position to gradually release money from that account at any future time point in any scenario, so that the shareholders get, on average, dynamically time, a percentage H times their capital at risk. Well, this is the formula. A little bit simplified, but basically that's it. Okay, so again, that's the pile of money I need to ask to my client upfront so that I can use this account in the future to remunerate my shareholders in a sustainable fashion. So that they all, oui? Capital T is the final maturity of the portfolio. Sorry?
Repeat the question, please.
So the question is, what is capital T? Huh? This is the question. So capital T is the final maturity of the portfolio, like 30 years, maybe. And then you might ask, how is it that these computations are made on a run-off basis? So assuming a fixed portfolio, which amortizes in time, not accounting for future trades that could come in. And the reason is that a bank is a market maker. So the bank has no visibility on future trades. Okay? And then you go to increments, etc. So this big T is a large 30 years or 50 years. The final maturity of all claims in the current portfolio of the bank. Another layer of complexity is that a bank is in fact the possibility to use economic capital as a free funding source on top of margins, as we said before, and on top of reserve capital in the form of CVA, FVA, MVA accounts. And then the funding needs of the bank are reduced from that quantity that we saw before to that one, where this is capital at risk, as we just said, but where L is the P&L, which is kind of the martingale part of the, let us say, the FVA, for simplicity. And then you obtain an anticipated BSD for the FVA, which again is another layer of complexity. So that was the complete picture in the case of a bank engaged into bilateral trading with a single client. But of course, in reality, you have like 2,000 netting sets, okay, 2,000 clients, let's say, but only one funding set, okay? So 2,000 clients means that regarding the CVA, okay, you don't need to do one computation per trade, but you don't need to do one huge computation either. You can, the CVA computation splits at the level of netting sets. Okay, so 2,000 clients mean 2,000 CVA computations. Okay, we cannot disaggregate it further because the terminal payoff of the CVA is nonlinear because there is a positive part here. Okay, but at least we can cut it into as many pieces as there are clients. Okay, it's better to have many smaller problems than a huge problem, right? So with CVA, the remark is that you can, instead of solving a huge problem, you can solve 2,000 smaller problems, but not better than that. FVA is worse because it's only one funding set. So FVA, unfortunately, to have it right, can only be computed at the level of the portfolio of the bank as a whole. And the same is true for KVA, and KVA is even worse because it integrates future conditional risk measures of P&L, where P&L is made of future fluctuations of other VAs, right? So KVA is like one level of compound option above the others. Okay. So this is the picture now for portfolios, for bilateral portfolios. But nowadays, banks are also engaged into centrally cleared trading. So centrally cleared trading is when a hub, a CCP, central counterparty, interposes itself between market participants, okay, and becomes a buyer to every seller and the seller to every buyer. Okay, the prime motivation being to reduce exposures by an obvious netting effect, which is reflected in this picture here. Okay, so that would be the the description of the financial network today, where you have a number of banks. Bank 0 would be the bank of interest. I want to compute XVA of, okay? But you have many banks. Each bank is connected to corporate clients, many clients, okay? Each bank is also hedging its bilateral trading with other banks or on the repo market, so excuse me. But on top of that, each bank is also involved with not one, but plenty of CCPs, okay? So if I focus on bank 0, okay, and I split bank 0 into, it's convenient to distinguish XVA traders and business traders of bank number 0, okay? This bank 0 is involved into bilateral, little b, trades with client 0, but also client 1 and client 2000, okay? Bank number 0 is involved into centrally cleared trading with CCP number 0, CCP1, CCP2, etc., okay? Where each CCP has business with a number of clearing members, okay? So when you put all of that together, I think it's sufficiently clear from what I showed before that you get very, very complex equations at the portfolio level, okay? And this is not to say that we don't need accuracy. We need, well, there is obviously a lot of model risk in that, so we are not after 10 minus 6, but we need accuracy in the sense that incremental XVAs are not in the numerical noise of the machine. I mean, if your XVA engine is such that when you add the next trade, the incremental XVA is in the Monte Carlo noise of your machinery, you cannot really use it for pricing. I mean, you can use it at the stock level to produce numbers in your balance sheet, but you cannot use it for entry prices. Okay? So this picture is representing the logical structure and connections between these different XVAs, and also this makes their compound option well apparent, and it's also, as a matter of fact, a nested Monte Carlo simulation tree, right? So the last layer here, so like this node, is saying that to price a derivative, to get the mark-to-market derivative, which is a counterparty risk-free valuation of a swap or a call of an option, unless you are lucky and you have a formula, okay, you would do it by Monte Carlo. So you need to launch pass and get a number. Okay. If you want to compute a CVA, or let's say a CVA, we saw from the formula that CVA is expectation of future mark-to-market, but not only that, minus VM, minus initial margin posted by the bank. It needs to price a CVA, unless I am very lucky and I have a formula, but it becomes a bit not so realistic. I need to launch pass, and then at the end of each pass, relaunching pass to price my MTM and also to get the level of the margins at the inner nodes. Okay, so which means that CVA is like one layer above, in fact 2 layers, because there is EM which sits in the middle in a sense, because so to get my CVA, I need future EM, but future EM is, I mean, what EM is, I didn't detail, but it's expectation of future value at risk of my portfolio. So to get EM, I need to simulate a future, again, MTM, and then I need future cash flows. Okay, so MTM is straight Monte Carlo. EM is nested Monte Carlo already. CVA is already doubly nested Monte Carlo. FVA, if you remember, is integrating cash flows with CVA. CVA is part of the CVA cash flows. So FVA is 3-layer nested Monte Carlo. Capital economic is 4, and KVA, in the end, would be a 5-layer nested Monte Carlo. So 6 layers of Monte Carlo. And what you should realize is that each of these nodes here, and from each of these nodes, you should relaunch a tree similar to that one. Okay? So I'm talking of power 6, basically. Okay? And not only that, but some of the layers are multi-time step, like FVA layer, because it is a BSD. You have to, so that would be here FVA computation at each of these nodes, which are used for economic capital computations. So to compute each of these FVAs, I need to to introduce a time grid and to do regressions, time step after time step. Okay. So it's obviously a very big numerical problem. So, however, I mean, these trees that I introduced is mostly for, in a sense, the logical structure between the different VAs. In practice, a user, a bank, is not always interested in all the XVA components. So, what you really need to process numerically is the subtree rooted at the most outer XVA of interest. Like if you do, so I know some banks who do not do KVA. So for them, EC is only used for KVA. So for them, it only starts here. They only want to do CVA and FVA. So they can forget everything here and start here. If, I don't know, some entity is only interested in CVA, then you would start here. You would only need to do that. You can forget everything else. So another consideration is that if you put yourself in a situation where you have formulas or proxies or approximations for some layer. Let's say, for instance, you are doing swaps, and so you... Sorry. So if you do swaps, you have analytic formulas for these swaps, so you don't need to relaunch inner pass to get MTM. Okay, then you don't need to do that layer. Okay, and CVA, if there is no EM, would be standard Monte Carlo, not even nested. Okay. Or yeah, exactly. Or if you use some what people call dynamic mapping for EMs, maybe you don't need to resimulate to get your EMs because you will use a proxy. So that essentially your EM is at least initial margin is obtained by a formula. Okay. So it means it will not be the whole tree that will have to be processed, but only a subtree rooted at the most outer XVA you are interested in. And even if I'm interested in that subtree, okay, if I have formula for MTM, the last layer disappears, for instance. Okay. So now design parameterization. So more precisely, how would we choose the number of paths in each layer? Okay. So the important remark when you do nested Monte Carlo, okay, is that M0 most outer times M0 again inner, etc., is not more accurate than M0 times square root of M0 times square root of M0. Because there is a classical cancellation in the Taylor formula. So it's useless to, it's only for the most outer layer that you need to take many paths. So that's good news, of course. Okay? And it will always give you the square root of M accuracy. So this is that would be for homogeneous variances across layers, which is not the case. Some variances are bigger or larger constants than the others. Okay? So what this means using this kind of approach is that, well, basically you would select which XVA you want to compute, which layers you want to use formulas for, or you want to do by Monte Carlo really, and then you would basically choose the number of most outer paths to size the confidence interval, and then you would play with the inner number of paths, okay, which basically can be taken as square root of the most outer M, but with some flexibility, maybe you can exploit less variance on some layers, etc. Okay. Which means that the number of paths that you need to use in the inner Monte Carlos can be quite small, like 100, 1,000, depending on the layers. Sometimes even less than that, sometimes a bit more. Okay. And not only that, but we have now some powerful parallelization technologies, okay? And the most powerful, of course, being GPU, okay? There are also some machine learning techniques that can be used That's work in progress with Emmanuel, Vlad, who are here. Okay. So GPU means thousands of processors which are grouped into blocks of processors. Okay. And basically, potentially, with respect to a CPU implementation, it means a potential speed up of 100. Okay. Provided at least you don't mess up with memory, which is the issue with GPUs. Okay. So to show some toy examples which are run on a single GPU. So single GPU means 4,000 GPU processors. Okay. So we only show simply nested Monte Carlo. Okay. I'm not aware of any bank doing more than that. As a matter of fact, many banks don't do nested at all. They purely rely on mark-to-market cubes to generate what they call EPE profiles, and then they integrate again credit spreads. Okay. But this is not good enough. I mean, what I just said is an approach which is a bottom-up approach, which is mostly motivated by a bank not willing to update substantially its IT. Okay. Otherwise, if you want to do better than that, you go to nested Monte Carlo. But again, I'm not aware of any bank who would use a system with more than one nested level of Monte Carlo. So I'm just showing experiments with single nested Monte Carlo. So in that case, to compute a CVA on a portfolio of CDSs. Okay. And what I want to show you here is that, so it's 100 CDSs. We use nested Monte Carlo, that is, we launch pass to get the CVA, but whenever the client default or one of the, we need to relaunch pass to value the CDS at that point in time. Okay, so it's nested. Okay, and what we can see here, so the number of outer pass is 100 times 100,000 basically. And the very interesting observation is that, consistently to what we said before, you can take really few inner pass, like 128 here, and that's enough. Meaning, if I take more inner pass to value my CDSs, okay, the impact on the result is what it is, but much smaller than the confidence interval of the outer Monte Carlo anyway. So it would make no sense if you take 100,000 outer pass. It makes no sense to take more than 100 inner pass. Okay. Similar story for FVA computations on the same CDS portfolio with 100 portfolios. So CVA is a bit more demanding because we need to do this regression in time. We need to account for the nonlinearity of the FVA equation. But same remark, not worth passing from 128 to 256 inner pass, because the impact on the value is much smaller than the confidence interval when you use 10,000 outer pass. Here we can notice that we can use less outer pass than for the CVA, because since we compute this FVA by successive conditional averaging, this has already a smoothing effect of its own. Okay, so not only the number of inner pass can still be kept very small, but in that case, the number of outer pass can also be very moderate, like 10,000. Okay. And this one took more than 1 minute, but it's only one GPU. It's a single GPU implementation. Well, a trick we use is when we do the regressions, we don't keep all the eigenvalues of the covariance matrix. We filter out. And then that would be the impact of if you keep more or less eigenvalues. Okay. Now, last toy example is KVA. So that's KVA in the sense of the sizing of a default fund for a CCP, and that can be used for allocating a default fund between the clearing members. Anyway, what these graphs are showing is the economic capital processes. That is, that would be mean and upper and lower 1% quantile of the economic capital viewed as a process. Okay, so that would be these curves here. Okay, and the orange is what you lose if instead of doing a nested simulation of economic capital, you would work with a kind of midfield or term structure approximation where you don't condition. So you just compute unconditional expected shortfall of P&L between 2 years and 3 years, like here. Okay. And we see that the difference is significant. Okay. Perfect. So again, we have this. So in the case of KVA, the quantities that the KVA is integrating, that is economic capital, is very little volatile. Okay, there is little volatility here. Okay, and the reason why there is little volatility is because at least in the model we are using, the extreme losses, which are reflected in the KVA, are driven by default events and even joint default events among the clearing members of that CCP, and more than by market volatility swings. So it's not really a matter of volatility, it's more a matter of default, and that's why this is quite deterministic. Okay? And that's why that's good news for us, because then we can use very little outer KVA paths, as little as 500. Okay? Taking 1,000 doesn't change so much the value. Okay? So this is a summary of the different computation times and also speed-ups that you make if you do the GPU programming well. I mean, with GPU you can gain a lot, like 100, but there is also room to do it bad. Okay, you need to be careful with memory, etc. So the message is that if you do it well, nested Monte Carlo XVA computations are within reach. Okay, even with a single GPU. But again, optimization are important. Okay, and to finish by a real portfolio study, nested Monte Carlo XVAs on a real portfolio. So that would be a portfolio of a bank with 2,000 counterparties, 100,000 FX products. Okay. So the way we use the nested here, we use it for basically simulating the loss process L that is needed for the KVA computations, and also to account for the impact on the FVA of the free funding source, which is provided by economic capital. As I mentioned at some point, there is no initial margin here, so it's only about CVA, FVA, and KVA. Okay. The models we are using are the one in this paper, and so that's 20,000 primary scenarios, 50 years, 1,000 secondary scenarios. So in the end, it's 2 billion scenarios that you need to do in this nested story. And for that, we do it on a supercomputer with several nodes, each of them being equipped with a number of GPUs and CPUs. Okay. And then in a few 30 minutes, well, part of the computation is offline, okay, like model calibration, etc. This is done offline. And then the XVA computation properly set takes a few minutes building on that. And that would be the dollar amounts at the portfolio level, like $242 million would be the CVA of that portfolio. Okay. 126 would be the FVA neglecting the free funding source provided by economic capital, but the true FVA, duly accounting for it, is only 62 million. In that case, the biggest VA is KVA, which is 275 million. And just for comparison, I'm showing first to default CVA, first to default DVA, related to what I skipped in the beginning. That is, if you take a fair valuation perspective, you would conclude that XVA should be the difference between these two guys, like 33 million. If you take a shareholder perspective, your conclusion is that XVA should be the sum of 200, 100, and 260, and 100, which is 500 million. Okay, so completely disconnected numbers. And the final conclusion is a graph which shows the term structure of economic capital in blue. This is for a portfolio which is fixed, so it amortizes in time, that's why it goes to 0. And orange is the corresponding term structure of the KVA. On the right-hand side, what you can see is, so blue is the CDS curve of the bank. So in principle, when the bank borrows money, it costs the bank 100 BPs. Okay? But if you account for the free funding source provided by economic capital, the corresponding implied blended spread, funding spread of the bank, is a factor 3 less, like 30 BPs.
Thank you very much.